In this program are those of the hosts and guests and do not necessarily reflect the views of Urban One Incorporated, Radio One, or any of its subsidiary companies. Attorney Nathaniel Lee, a lawyer with credibility, success, and experience, representing people in hundreds of jury trials, Nathaniel Lee is who you want by your side in the courtroom. You've seen the rest, now hire the best. Contact Lee, Cosell, and Feigley today. And now, to address the legal concerns of the community, Praise AM 1310, 95.1 FM presents Legally Speaking. Here are today's hosts.
Good morning, everyone. This is Nathaniel Lee. Thank you for joining our show. And I especially like to thank the people in South Florida for your text you sent to me. Thank you for watching our show, and all the folks in Illinois, Indianapolis, and wherever you are, thank you. Today I have with me today is Attorney Marlon Prime, superstar attorney, worked for the Department of Justice for most of his career, and provide technical insight of what was a very important institution in the American justice system. But before we get started, I need to update you on some critical things that happened here in Indiana. First, as of January 1st, our administration, the governor and the Republican legislators, they modified SNAP benefits. And at first, I thought about it. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that it's just a terrible thing. Now, the people who can't afford to pay for food and things like that, they put limitations saying that they can't buy soda pops and sugary drinks and snacks. And I was thinking about that. I mean, I like to have my candy and soda pops or things like that. And if you were poor, they're saying you can't have that anymore. It's just kind of sad. The second thing is that I got the voter data emailed to me this week. In Indianapolis now, we have 647,977 registered voters. And the most we get to vote is about 48%. But what is critical, we have over 400 and some odd thousand registered Democrats, and we only get about 210 to 220,000 to vote. So in other words, if you folks in Indianapolis get off your posterior and get your friends to do the same thing and vote, we can win statewide election probably if we get everybody to vote. But that's just my hope and prayer that we do that. The third thing, though, that really got me riled up was like a bomb dropped this week in the city government. The mayor of Indianapolis, chief of staff, had resigned effective the last day of December of last year. The mayor appointed his new chief of staff, Police Chief Bailey. Now, why is that such a big deal to Nathaniel Lee? Here's why. Indianapolis, Indiana, folks, has the rating of #1 in America for one morbid statistical fact. Indianapolis, folks, had more shooting of black males by police officers than any city on the planet. Indianapolis has had more black males shot and killed by police officers. I watched when people were upset at the mayor's office because a couple of women made sexual harassment allegations. They wanted the mayor to resign. I watched a lot of different things, but I did not see the public outcry to all these black men being killed by police officers. Now, to somehow approve that, the mayor, the person in charge of making our city safe, get fair treatment, is not going to become the chief of staff for the mayor. I just thought that was a terrible decision, because now it's almost like we don't care about all these young men that was killed by police officers. There's no accountability within the city administration. It's shameful the way they've treated these cases. I have personal knowledge of how they basically massage the evidence to not actually investigate them correctly. And I'm really concerned about that. I took on a couple of these cases, and I'm just stunned as the level of investigation or lack thereof by the department to show the misconduct of the officer. No matter what happened, whether they're armed or unarmed, they shoot them. And in each of the cases that I was looking at, the shooting was unnecessary. And the net result is that there's no accountability. One of the guys who shot the guy that was in a tree, he gets a pension for the rest of his life for shooting and killing a black guy. And so these issues are very important. And I think there should be some community outrage. Because Marlon, this week, I watched in horror of a woman get shot and killed by ICE in Minnesota. And that was something I thought was terrible, terrible tragedy in America, political sense, in the sense that we see third world countries and with dictators, and what we see in those countries are dictators that use their military for policing. I can tell you up front that the military has never been the appropriate mechanism for policing. The military, when you're in the military, they teach you how to do one thing: kill other people. The police requirements is that they serve and protect the public. And so the two are not the same. But Marlon, I was concerned about that shooting in Minnesota. Why would they think that after the statements they made, the Department of Justice would be the correct agency to investigate this shooting?
Yes. Well, good morning, Nathaniel, and Happy New Year to you and all your listeners. Yeah, certainly we're living in troubled times here. And I couldn't agree with you more as it relates to the work, the important work of policing. Not only does it involve, keeping individuals safe, it involves de-escalation techniques. And as you know, there's been a transformation of a lot of our police departments across the country to ensure that there's de-escalation training. And so the problem is that when you have military or you have ICE, they don't get the benefit of that. And so then you get tragedies like we have in Minnesota. So one of the things I think your listeners should be aware of is that there were so many least drastic means that ICE could have used. She was the victim was in her own car with her own license plates. There was no clear and present reason why they needed to stop her then. If somebody wants to flee, the remedy is to take down their license plate and get them later. You can't basically put yourself in harm's way, as some of the not police reports, but some of the reports from the New York Times and other institutions have indicated that these shots came from the side of the vehicle, and it suggests that the police officer stopped it in front of the vehicle. So, and I think it's also important for your listeners to understand the distinction. If there's a clear and present danger that they're using the vehicle to harm a police officer, and there's going to be imminent risk of death or serious bodily harm, then most of their case law says, hey, they can use deadly force. But in this situation, it seems to suggest that the police officer put himself in front of the vehicle, at least these preliminary reports, and that the victim was veering or steering away from him. In those situations, that just doesn't jive with existing case law in these particular incidents. Now, the case has to be further investigated, but there was a video that was circulating online, a cell phone video, 45 seconds, and the New York Times did a detailed analysis of it. And if that holds up to be true, that the victim was veering away from police and just attempting to flee, you can't use deadly force in those circumstances. So I was disappointed, in that if we have the Department of Justice coming in to investigate, the first thing that they should be doing is saying, hey, this is a tragedy, number one, and number two, we're going to do a full and fair investigation and get to the bottom of it. So I think it was disheartening that you had, many people at the top of our government, the federal government, really making definitive statements. I think anytime a tragedy like this happens, it's very fact specific, and people need to, do an analysis before really jump to conclusions. I was disappointed as a former employee at the Department of Justice for 30 years, that they kind of skip that important step.
Well, I was concerned about statements made by the people in the administration that describe a series of events that didn't occur. They somehow characterized this woman as, quote, a riotous, plural, like there's some type of attack on these armed ICE agents. It was just so incredibly wrong what they were saying. And the people in the city are exercising their First Amendment rights. And all of these videos that are populating paint a disturbing picture. When I looked at that, the more I looked at it, the more I felt that this was unreasonable use of force, of deadly force. He shot in a moving vehicle 3 times. But the first shot that he made that hit the right side of the windshield, when I looked at that, I'm saying 6 more inches to the right, he shot and killed one of the ICE agents. And almost every police department that I've seen their records, they discourage police officers from shooting at moving vehicles. Now, just think about why we have a rule like that. Say a police officer see a suspect who had committed a felony fleeing in a car, and he shoots at the car. The suspect got his feet on the gas. If he shoots the suspect, cause injury, what happened to the car? The car become a deadly weapon. It could accelerate, it could turn, it could do 100 different things that could result in mass casualty. So there's a number of reasons why you don't shoot at moving cars. But if you do shoot at moving cars, the target shouldn't be the person, should be the tires. You know, in other words, you get a flat tire, and that makes sense because it disables the car. But you don't shoot the driver and risk harming other innocent third parties. And so that's my problem with this, Marlon. I'm looking at this guy shooting at the car, and you look at that first bullet that hit the windshield, I think, my God, did he realize that he could have actually killed one of the other ICE agents? And I just think that what we're seeing is not only bad policing, but it is bad for our country to allow this to occur.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Enshrined in our system of government is the ability of individuals to peacefully protest. So you should be able to do that. That's the key tenet of a functioning democracy, that people have a right to indicate that there's a problem and they want a problem to be corrected. And so, that's certainly problematic if it's perceived that the government's doing anything to stifle the ability of people to peacefully protest. And I agree that in terms of the tactics that were used, it does not jive with existing law. You cannot shoot into a vehicle to stop someone from fleeing. It has to be a circumstance where there's imminent, risk of harm to the officer, and I think the investigation will have to play itself out. But in terms of the New York Times analysis, and if you look at the videotape, assuming that's going to be authenticated, there's certainly some problems in terms of the actions that were taken, and I think that we further just have to ask ourselves, I mean, is this the country that we want? I mean, not only have we seen, this situation where someone shot, we've seen circumstances where, there was a situation in the Midwest where an ICE officer chased someone into a daycare center or in schools or in churches. I mean, I think that we really need to pump the brakes. We really need to have a dialogue as to, is this who and what we are? Now, the way this was sold in our election was that, hey, we're only going to go after individuals that, are gang members or hardened criminals. But the analysis from most reputable news sources have indicated that's just not accurate, that they're, rounding up people with no criminal records or minor criminal records, and not what they alleged during the campaign that was going to be the gangbangers and those that are engaged in serious felonies. And then finally, it just kind of goes to the question of, it's important for us to stay engaged and, use our right to vote in this upcoming midterm elections.
Okay, Imhotep, you have a question or comment for today, sir. Go ahead.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, great gentlemen, and thank you for taking my call, brother Nate. It astounds. I guess for Black people, we've seen this so much going back to, Martin Luther King, who they trying to cancel as far as his colleges and stuff with the day, and then Trump trying to cancel free federal parks on this day. We've seen it going back to the end, and lawlessness or selective law has just been a problem here. Now, I just was listening to a well-known attorney last night talk about how Pam Bondi, Donald Trump, nobody really, there's nothing they can do to stop Moriarty and Keith Ellison from filing charges on him. And the burden of a grand jury is way less than the burden of a reasonable shadow of a doubt in court. And he feels that they got enough right now to indict him, even from a grand jury standpoint. It's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But it's nothing. They can take him and shield him and try to snatch all the evidence that they want to try to hide. And that can be used against them when you don't turn over and when you try to hide evidence. But I think, can you clear it for the people so they can understand that from the state and from the state, the county prosecutor, from the prosecutor, local prosecutor standpoint, that area is very experienced in prosecuting police officers. They convicted Derek Chauvin, they convicted the other Somalian cop that shot the white woman in the alley that time. And that they get to bite at the apple. There's nothing that Trump can do to stop him from being indicted. I think the public really needs to understand that, because from what I'm reading from the public, they're thinking that it's only the federal government is in total charge, and that's not the case. Can you clear that up for us? And I'll just
Wait a second. First of all,
okay, I'll stay. Yeah.
Hold on a second. There's one thing that you didn't address. What about, why wasn't there outrage? We had 18 Black guys killed in Indianapolis by a police officer over a 3-month time period. I mean, I didn't see people getting outraged about that. I was troubled by that.
Talking about with Keith Porter in LA, the Black guy that was killed on New Year's Eve by the ICE. Is that you're talking about?
Here in Indianapolis, we're #1 in the country in police killing Black guys.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I didn't see the public outrage about that, and I was concerned because do you think that all 18 were justifiable shooting? I know they weren't.
And that's probably why the chief is stepping down, taking that the deputy mayor role, which is a political role. I'm shocked that he would take a political role, because he probably know he can't control this rank and file. And
hey,
you're right.
That's a promotion. Hey, that's a promotion. That's not.
It is a promotion, but it's a political. Yeah, it's a political position, though. When the mayor gets elected out, if or leaves, then he's done. So, but you're right. It should be outrage all over. The Keith Porter incident on New Year's Eve in LA. I heard they had a real big city council meeting there yesterday. Cops showed up at the meeting with swastika laden hoodies on. It was just ugly. It was an ugly meeting, they said, in LA. And people, we're just hearing about him because of what happened to the lady in Minnesota. But he was shot and killed by ICE sitting on his porch. Blackman sitting on his porch. So just the local prosecutor, that's always been an issue. You've talked about local prosecutors, understanding their role to the public and not worried about their position and being buddy with the police. I think Ryan Mears has established that he will go after cops that don't do right for the most part here. But what's your opinion? What do you think locally? I expect them to be indicted up there. I expect them to be indicted.
Marlon, what do you think?
Thank you, brother. Thank you.
Well, hey, good morning, brother. Yes. So there's two different things. Now, your local crimes are going to be your murder or excessive use of force. So typically, those are going to be charged at a local or state level. The federal government's only going to get involved if there is a hate crime and there's a violation of federal law. So you can have dual prosecutions like you had in Rodney King. You had a state prosecution that failed, and then the federal government came in and they tried that case under federal hate crime. The federal role is a little different than the state role. So in answer to your question, yes, the state of Minnesota can prosecute. I think the federal government can impede that process because, a lot of the evidence is going to, come from what the training was for ICE and, background. And so they can certainly, make it more difficult. But, I anticipate that there will be at least some attempt. Now, the one thing that your audience should be aware of, Nathaniel, is that, and you know this as well because you've done a lot of police misconduct cases and shootings, that there is really a move afoot across the country to provide more and more immunity for officers. And, these cases are more and more difficult to win. So that's something that I think that, your listeners should be aware of, that, when you're, voting for Supreme Court justices of your particular state or state court judges, or you're voting for prosecutors, you should be really, asking for their positions on those particular issues, because the whole issue in terms of kind of going full circle about, the increased number of African Americans being shot, that really stems from the fact that there's a move afoot to make, officer misconduct very much more difficult to litigate in court. All right. So that's something that we really need to keep our eye on. We need to really look at, records of prosecutors that are running for office. We need to encourage people to be prosecutors, whether assistant prosecutors or the prosecutor, and really ask them those candid questions.
I will make something really clear, folks. I think our current prosecutor, Ryan Mears, is by far the best prosecutor we've ever had since I've been a lawyer. I've seen him do things that are fair, particularly to people in our community in the program. And so we're very fortunate to have a prosecutor that, in my opinion, is doing a great job for the community. And he has prosecuted a number of police officers. But there's a flaw in our system, audience, that is that the police department investigate its own officers, and I've seen evidence now that they're tipping the scales of justice in favor of the police officer as part of their investigatory process. I've seen what I've determined to be inadequate investigation on most of these shooting cases. So the problem that we have to do is that we have to look at these cases very carefully. We have public outrage because we see this horrific event in Minnesota. And we can't forget about the fact that we have similar type events right here in our city. And so don't forget that. And so one of the problems that we've been talking about every week is that we must exercise our right to vote. We got to do a better job in our community. We got to quit allowing people to make excuses why they don't vote. Because Marlon, it's very simple. We're in this predicament now solely because between Harris and Biden, I think Harris got about 6 million less votes than Biden did. And that's how we got this. We're in this mess now. And that's because people just didn't get out to vote. And I think that is lesson learned. I talk to people, Marlon, I'm out and about, and some of the excuses why people don't vote is astounding to me. One of the things that just irked me, I was talking to a young lady back in December, and I won't give you the description, but in essence, she'd had a nothing misdemeanor that could be expunged really quickly. because she had a misdemeanor, she said, Attorney Lee, I can't vote. I had a misdemeanor. What are you talking about? I mean, it was insane to me that a person thought that they can't vote. In our state, the only time you can't vote in Indiana is when you're in prison, in the state prison. But other than that, when you get out, you get registered to vote, you can vote. Some states require that you get restoration of citizenship, but that's not our state. And so the point I'm making is we have to make sure that we exercise the right to vote, because we can complain about these things, but there's no resolution unless you exercise the power that the country give you, that is to vote. And, you know, we have a couple of things we do as citizens that are extraordinary. One, you can serve in the military, serve the country. Two, you get to vote. And three, serve on jury duties. So the two things that you could do that are important to maintaining our democracy, it is also important that we get justice and accountability when you do those two items. So that's my take on this today. But the more, Marlon, I look at these action of ICE, the more I'm saddened, because it just seemed like to me that their tactics are just distasteful and overtly aggressive.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we've been talking on this show about ICE for a number of weeks, and we were suggesting that tragedy like this would happen because, as you rightly indicated, these are individuals that may not have the same training that police officers have in terms of de-escalation, in terms of understanding when deadly force in fact can be used. So it certainly is problematic. And I think going back to your other question is that you're right in terms of just elections. There's a lot of people that look like you and I that decided to vote the couch and just stay at home and rest on the couch instead of exercising the right to vote. And one of the things that I heard all across the country is that, hey, how is this going to impact me directly? I don't see my life changing. And I think we can see from this administration that there's a lot of things that are changing, not only as it relates to ICE enforcement, but in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion, the issues in terms of, affordable health care, policing issues, foreign policy. So it just reinforces what a number of us have been saying, that, hey, you have to get engaged, you have to understand the issues, and you have to exercise your right to vote.
Now, one of the other important things that happened this week, on a personal note, I know that you had big concern, that was January 6th incident where the rioters attempted to overthrow the federal government. I think that your kids were in D.C. at the time, weren't they?
Goodness, yes. Nathaniel, that was like 5 years ago. And that was, those are just, days that you always remember. And as your audience, may recall, I was in the deposition on January 6th, on the day that, this incident occurred. And, one of the things that any spouse dreads is that when you get those, repeated phone calls from your spouse, normally my spouse, if she wants something or vice versa, it's one call and, we understand that we're going to get back with one another. But when someone's calling you repeatedly, I took a break in the deposition and remember my wife saying, hey, are you watching the news? I was like, no. And she says, they took over the Capitol. We can't find our daughter. And so at that time, my daughter was working at the Capitol and lived basically 100 yards from the Capitol. We got her an apartment so she could get back and forth to work. And I think the thing that really unnerves me about this whole process is that there's an attempt to really whitewash history. There were people that were in grave danger, and that really it was very bad. A number of people, were beat, particularly police officers. But what happened was, fortunately, my daughter was not working that day and was safe. But many of her colleagues who were young people that were just volunteering because of the love of the country, working at a very low rate, what happened is that when there was an overthrow of the Capitol, the Secret Service came in and took the Congress people to the secured location in the Capitol, and these interns were left to fend for themselves. You should really look online, your audience, and look at what happened to Nancy Pelosi, the then Speaker of the House staff. These kids had to barricade themselves into Nancy Pelosi's office. They had to hide under a coffee table. Meanwhile, a mob was saying, "Hey, where's Nancy? We're going to hang her." And then, of course, Mike Pence, from the great state of Indiana, there were shouts that they wanted to hang him simply because, he refused to kind of go along with this hoax that somehow there was a viable pathway for the president, for then President Trump to remain in office. And I think, we should never forget what happened, because that was the first time in decades that the Capitol had been overrun. It wasn't, I think it was last time the British, when they burned the White House, but you had Confederate flags, that were in the Capitol. You had, just defecation all over the place. And, and it easily could have gone left, and people could have, more people could have been killed. And so if we're really not careful as people, we will, have this narrative that, as the president says, that, hey, these are just people doing peaceful protests, or trying to equate that with, other protests around the country, which is totally inappropriate. They use the apparatus of government to try to overthrow the government. And that's why it's so important for your audience to review the deposition testimony of Jack Smith, who was appointed as an independent prosecutor. And he really set the record straight in terms of what happened. He's saying, no, there is no historical analog in terms of what happened. This was an attempt to overthrow the government. And in fact, the testimony indicated that Jack Smith said, hey, had he been permitted to prosecute the president, he says most of the testimony would have come from Republicans, who basically said they were called and told about this scheme to, have fake electors. And they basically pushed back and said, hey, this is clearly unconstitutional. And in fact, one legislator from Pennsylvania said, quote unquote, hey, this is an attempt to overthrow the government. So we just can't forget what happened. We can't allow people to whitewash what happened. We have to, on that day every year, we have to just understand our democracy is so fragile, and we need to hold the people accountable. And if we can't prosecute them, we need to make sure that, we never forget. And I think there's a number of news publications that are trying to archive a lot of those videotapes, because magically a lot of those tapes are being deleted by the federal government. So it's a really important day in our country, and it's something that I don't think we should ever forget.
Well, there's a couple of things about that that was troublesome to me. That is that a lot of the political pundits, particularly some of the elected representatives and senators and things like that, they were terrified when these events were unfolding at the Capitol. They were terrified. It was readily ascertainable that I remember Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, the MAGA supporter, running to save his own life. And then they have a 180-degree reversal of what occurred. So we see this attempt to rewrite history. And what I don't understand is America becoming the land of cults. So in other words, we saw with our own eyes the deplorable condition that they rendered the Capitol. We saw that. Now we're attempting to rewrite history to paint a different narrative. For example, what I didn't understand, well, I've never seen this done since I've been a lawyer. The President of the United States gave a blanket pardon to every individual within a certain distance from the Capitol. I thought when you got a pardon that it had to list your name and what you're being pardoned for. I didn't know, maybe that's happened sometime in history, but I've not seen it, that the rioters, even though many had pled guilty, some had also served time in jail, were given these blanket pardons for every crime committed within a certain distance from the Capitol. How is that legal?
Yeah, well, the pardon power of the president is fairly broad, but I think this kind of dovetails into our prior conversation in terms of prosecutorial discretion. A lot of those cases, they really started off just, prosecute them as trespassers cases, and I think that they should have thrown the book at everybody that had any involvement. And I think, had we had, more diverse prosecutors or had a wider perspective, that would have been the case. I think the other thing that's really problematic that really led into this narrative is that the then Attorney General, Merrick Garland, really dragged his feet for a couple years. I mean, Jack Smith, the independent prosecutor, wasn't appointed until November of what was like 2 years later. I mean, if you're gonna make the argument that this is a serious threat to democracy, you can't let this case languish for 2 years. At the very beginning in January, when the new administration came in, there should have been an immediate appointing of an independent prosecutor to get to the bottom of it. So you lead to that narrative when you don't take it seriously, when you don't charge people to the full extent of the law, you kind of almost back into this, this histrionics that we're seeing now, that this was no big deal. I think the way history should remember this is for what it is. Everyone should know from just basic civics classes, electoral college, you have people that are appointed, and those are the individuals that cast the ballots. And what these individuals, the present administration was trying to do is they were trying to select their own electors and have them vote contrary to, what the people dictated for that particular state. And they knew it was wrong. You can't do that. So it was certainly problematic. It was foreseeable, as Jack Smith said, the prosecutor, that when the president invites people to come to the Capitol on January 6th, and they're have this rally at the Ellipse and says we're going to go to the Capitol, what happened was totally foreseeable. And I think Jack Smith is right that the administration, the president, bears a primary responsibility for what in fact happened. And I know that a number of your listeners may be concerned about me saying this, but I'll say it anyway. I mean, had this been anybody else, had this been President Obama, had it been the Million Man March, whatever it is, when there are a different set of people that come to the Capitol that look like you or me, and if there's any violence that would have happened, everyone that was involved in planning would have been prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There wouldn't have been any historic ironics, and people certainly wouldn't have been pardoned. And so all I'm saying is that we need to hold people to the same standard. Now, since they're pardoned, I mean, the law basically says, hey, that's off the books. But that doesn't mean we can't remember what they did and make sure it doesn't happen again.
What we saw was a terrible tragedy. And the response, I think, is even more worse, because now we're saying that folks were legally justified, and they weren't. And to equate the overthrow of the federal government to people rioting and post that, there are a whole different meaning in terms of how democracy works. And so I was concerned. Now, one of the other issues, though, out of this confusing set of legal things, we've had some of the folks involved in the prosecution of the Trump organization were targeted, and they're being prosecuted. What I was amazed, I saw yesterday that the Justice Department had issued subpoena to Letitia James, the AG out of New York, and the court threw them out because they were saying that the U.S. attorneys weren't legally appointed. What's going on in those cases? It seemed like to me that there's a lot of legal maneuvering, and what most people don't know is that in order to do defenses, these people have to be paying out a lot of money. These lawyers aren't free. I saw that their fees range from $1,000 to about $2,500 per hour. So they're paying out a lot of expenses for cases that are getting dismissed.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. One thing was very unusual is to have a president of the United States put in writing on his social media network that, hey, certain individuals that were involved in either prosecuting him or involved in January 6th should in fact be prosecuted. So that goes to the very nature of vindictive and selective prosecution. So they had that information out there. And then you're absolutely right. There are a number of attempts to do what the president had basically said on social media and prosecute these individuals. And it turned out that they didn't follow appropriate protocol in terms of the prosecution of the former FBI agent Comey or Attorney General James, and it resulted in a dismissal of those cases. In the case of former FBI Director Comey, the statute of limitations is now run, which basically means you have a certain limited amount of time to bring a case. So they're unlikely to be able to do that. I don't, given what we've seen, there may be some other charges. I don't know. But the courts have been hostile to prosecuting these individuals. But the other people to look at as well is that you have a group of just line prosecutors. This hasn't been reported as much as it should. So these are people that had positions just like I did. They were assistant U.S. attorney. They were assigned to prosecute January 6 cases, people that were involved in the overthrow. And a lot of those folks got fired. They did nothing wrong, but enforcing the law. And these are people that are just out of a job. And that's certainly unfortunate. Then you have law firms that, were involved in, representing, individuals that were involved in either prosecution of these crimes, and they were blacklisted. And a number of the law firms, as we've talked about previously, cut deals with the administration, but there are a number of law firms that fought, and when they fought in the courts, they overwhelmingly won. So, these are things that we really have to think about, that there are people that stood up, there are people that were punished for just simply doing their job, and that's certainly unfortunate. And it's something that we all should remember. And hopefully, these are people that will get their jobs back or get some relief in the court system is what my hope is.
One quick comment on that, Marlon. It's something that I don't think our viewers know. Yes, these prestigious law firms cut deals, particularly on the issue of diversity and inclusion, affirmative action, and all that. They rarely did that. But I have a different opinion as to why they did that. Most of these law firms, in terms of African American, they have like 1% of their lawyers are African Americans anyway. So cutting a deal, doing something you're already doing, is not really a deal. It's just affirming what you're doing. For years, we've been working with Bar Association, courts and stuff like that to diversify law firms, for example. And it's been an uphill battle, uphill struggle. Now we're seeing all the gains that we've made over 30 years, 40 years been erased. And so now we've weaponized what appears to be the Justice Department against political opponent of the president. Doesn't make any sense to me. That at some point in time, we need to get back on a normal path in this country, because what we're doing now is so abnormal. It's almost like we've relegated ourselves. Jesse Ventura said it best, the former governor of Minnesota. He I saw this news clip, Marlon, where he was talking about when he was in service. I think he's a SEAL. He was saying that he know what a third world country is. He was in some country for 17 months. In third world countries run by dictators, the military is a law enforcement mechanism. And he equated the United States now is relegated to third world country because now we're involved in the military in what should be normal police operation. And, ICE is like instead of being an agency, they've made them like a military unit. And so these folks aren't trained apparently in normal policing. Normal policing responsibility is to protect and serve. That's not what they're doing. They're endangering people's lives. And so according to former Governor Ventura, we become a third world country.
Yeah, there are some certain challenges, but our democracy is worth fighting for. And uh, and if we're not careful, things can continue to backslide. So it's just, so important for us to get involved and engage. But you raised an interesting point, not only regarding that, but the issue of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The importance of your show is just educating people that are amongst your listeners regarding some of these false narratives that are out there. Now, basically, there has been, in my view, a successful campaign to demonize diversity, equity, and inclusion. And, we just don't talk about why this was necessary. Now, you went to the University of Georgia, but my aunt, she was an A student. Her parents paid taxes in the state of Georgia, but she couldn't apply because they didn't accept African Americans in the 40s and the 1950s. So the state of Georgia basically said, hey, we're going to ship all the African Americans to, colleges in the North. So the whole reason why diversity, equity, and inclusion happened was because we weren't getting opportunities. And if you look at it today, if you have a Black person and a white person with the same qualifications and different sounding names, even today, you see that the Black applicant doesn't get the same opportunity. So all DEI is saying is cast a wide net and give everybody a chance. And if we can't really articulate that and let people understand that, hey, we're all created equal, you should look at a workforce with a scant eye if there's nobody of color, unless you're of the mindset that God has only blessed one race of people or one, male, white, or whatever, and nobody else is qualified. As a multiracial society, we should strive to get the best and the brightest, and the best and the brightest are of multiple colors, multiple sexes. And so we really got to get that message out that there's nothing wrong with casting a wide net so that everyone gets opportunity. If they fail, they fail, but give them an opportunity to get in the door.
Well, that was a fascinating dialogue you just had. But when you mentioned Georgia, I did go to law school there, and they did give me a scholarship. But their history was just the opposite. When we were there, we characterized the University of Georgia Law School having always engaged in affirmative action. But affirmative action didn't mean opportunity for minority. It meant opportunity for people that had wealth and power and connection was able to get into the law school. That excluded Black folks. And so that's what the affirmative action program was at my university. And we were very fortunate because of the threat of lawsuits and litigation. We were able to be admitted into law school and receive a scholarship based on the fact that historically they had excluded folks like me from attending the law school. And I was very thankful for the opportunity, and it gave me an opportunity to get a quality education. Our law school was one of the top 20 in the country at the time, and make a good living. But for the fact of the struggles that the people made for civil rights and things like that, I was never be given an opportunity to attend this law school. And those opportunities we've seen are being taken away. And people don't realize how important that is. Even if I had gotten admitted to law school, you still need some financial system in order to pay for it. And so they made it very easy for me to go because I got a scholarship to pay my tuition and fees. And so it's not just being admitted, but you have to have that in place to make sure that you're successful. And so my concern, Marlon, and for our audience, is that the pathway for success for people like us is being diminished right before our eyes each day as we see these changes in our society. Folks, you can determine the wealth of any community, based upon these factors. Number one, how far did they go in school or college? Two, did they obtain professional degrees? So if you were to take a neighborhood and 80% of people had a terminal degree, like an MD, law degree, PhD, that would likely be an affluent neighborhood. On the other hand, if you took a neighborhood where the person had a high school diploma or less or dropout, then that statistically would be a poor neighborhood. Now, what are the other characteristics? You have single family households, you have higher crime rate, and so all those negative factors is based in part upon how often the person get advances in educational pursuits. So if we don't have those opportunities available to us, we're reversing, and that would relegate us to a lower economic status in our community. And that's why this discussion is so important, that you understand that we have to make sure that we educate our young folks so they can have a better opportunity for themselves in the future. And I think that's key.
Yeah, I couldn't. I certainly agree. And then even look at it from a selfish perspective, we're getting up in age. Hey, we need people working and engaged to support, our retirement. So for Social Security, that's the way it's structured. You pay into the system and you get the benefit of, a portion of your wages, and that's supported by people that are working. And I think you're absolutely right. It's not in America's best interest to have whole segments of our population not have educational opportunities, not have job opportunities. And if you cut off diversity, equity, inclusion, that's what you basically get. And I think you're absolutely right that, we want to make sure, there's opportunities available. And that's why we've been talking about making sure student loans are available for people of modest means. There certainly can be reforms to those programs. We cannot close that pathway because not only does it hurt those generations behind us, but it actually hurts us as well when we talk about the deficits in our Social Security Administration and not being able to satisfy some of these existing debts. We need people to be working, to be engaged, and have opportunities.
Yeah, it's really sad because now one of the negative aspects I need our audience to know about this immigration crackdown is something that most people don't think about. The undocumented workers that were evicted from the country, they were required to pay taxes and into our Social Security Trust Fund. Although they pay into the fund, they're not eligible to receive any benefits. So we as America have benefited from people who are undocumented, pay into the system. Now we're evicting those folks at the time period in which we have an aging population. So that tells me that we're going to have a shortage in our Social Security Trust Fund. Some people are predicting that it's going to run out of money by a certain date. But in reality, unless we get the current group of people to making more money and paying more into the system, we will run out of money. And so when you hear people talking about rounding people up and kicking them out the country, don't forget, they're kicking their revenue out the country too. That pays into the government funds. See, also, when people work, your employee have to pay matching FICA, FUTA, and unemployment. So all these taxes are taken from illegal people that are undocumented. And a lot of people call them illegal immigrants, but the point is, they pay the same taxes that you pay. Only difference is they do it, the ones I've seen on a 999 tax ID number, and they get no benefit. They don't get unemployment benefit. And now what's been cruel, I discovered, Marlon, in the state of Indiana, the undocumented immigrants now can't even get full health insurance through their state program. They only get emergency care. I thought that was a mistake. I said, who came up with this dumb idea to have people take away their health insurance? That didn't make any sense to me. So now we have sicker people and only have emergency care. It's just a dumb idea.
Yeah, I agree. Certainly lots of challenges. And the thing is, I think you should be aware, your listeners should be aware of just the bait and switch. They made it seem as though if there's going to be mass migration, there's going to be a decrease in unemployment in terms of, there's going to be more job opportunities. But we've seen the opposite. We've seen, construction jobs, high demand, not being able to fill those jobs in many states. We're seeing agriculture rotting in the fields. So there really was a bait and switch, and there really wasn't a discussion about what impact a mass deportation could have.
Terrible tragedy. But one final comment, we see that in your neck of the wood in Cleveland, just change the subject slightly, the Browns fired their head coach.
Oh boy.
What's the latest?
Well, we are long suffering. I'm a diehard Browns fan. We are long suffering. We just really need someone that's going to really have a concrete plan. We just, 1 year we're a West Coast offense, 1 year we're throwing the long pass. This was just certainly a disaster. We had the top defense in the football league, but we just couldn't get our offense together. And then Shedeur Sanders should have probably started from the very beginning and really put the infrastructure. And I think we probably, may have made the playoffs had we, pulled for him early. So certainly pray for us around the country. In Cleveland, we are long suffering. We're the only franchise that is outside of Detroit that's never been to the Super Bowl. So it's really, really bad. But we have a great defense. Myles Garrett, set the sack record, and we're hopeful that we'll have a brighter future. But as in Cleveland, we always say there's always next year, but hopefully next year will be our year.
Well, I enjoyed on a personal watching Sanders. He's a gifted athlete. He's got really accurate throws. I hope that Cleveland get a better offensive line because, some of the time I just saw them completely miss their blocks, and that was disturbing to me. I'm thinking, are you freaking kidding me? I watched a couple of the sacks they got, and the tackle would completely miss their blocks. When you're going into pass offensive formation, and, your guys got to go to your left or your right side. You have to make an assessment which way you're going, and then put your body on it. They missed it.
Yeah.
Terrible. But in any event, thank you very much, and your audience for today. And what final comments as we close out, Marlon?
Well, hey, just continue to stay involved. Make sure that you have a plan in terms of voting for this midterm. But more importantly, be conscious in terms of how you spend your dollar. Find a Black business, be intentional, whether it's a law firm, accounting firm, dentistry, going to a Black restaurant. These are things that are important that are going to uplift our whole community.
Well, thank you, everyone. We will be off next weekend, but join us in 2 weeks from now. We'll be in observance of the Martin Luther King holiday weekend, and hopefully you go out and do good deeds in your community. Thank you. We look forward to talk to you in 2 weeks. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye now.